The wind blew strongly in the valley. Dark clouds covered the sky. A storm was coming. In the distance, Kai heard the sound of swords hitting each other. Kai was a warrior. His armor was old and broken. His sword had many scratches. He had traveled for many days looking for the Shadow Clan. They were the warriors who destroyed his home. His heart was full of anger, but he also felt empty inside. Would revenge make him happy? He did not know. Suddenly, he saw something move behind a broken house. Kai held his sword tightly and walked forward. "Who is there?" he asked. There was silence. Then a small voice whispered, "Help me." Kai stopped. Was this a trap? But the voice sounded weak. He stepped closer. Behind the wall, he saw a little girl. She was about 10 years old. Her face was dirty, and she was holding something wrapped in cloth. "Please," she said, her hands shaking. "Save him." Kai knelt down and slowly opened the cloth. His eyes widened. Inside was a baby. The baby was very small and weak, but he was still breathing. Suddenly, thunder rumbled in the sky. The Shadow Clan was near. Kai looked at the children. Then he looked at his sword. Should he fight for his past, or should he protect the future? Kai took a deep breath. The baby was weak, and the little girl was afraid. He could not leave them alone. He put his sword back in its sheath and lifted the baby gently. "What is your name?" he asked the girl. "Ami," she said in a soft voice. "Ami, we must leave now," Kai said. "The Shadow Clan is coming." Ami nodded. She held on to Kai's cloak as they moved through the ruins of the village. Kai listened carefully. The enemy was close. He could hear footsteps in the distance. They reached the edge of the village, where an old forest stood. The trees were tall and dark. It was the only place to hide. "Stay close," Kai whispered. They entered the forest, stepping carefully on the wet ground. The baby made a small sound, but Ami quickly covered his mouth. She knew they had to be silent. Then Kai stopped. He saw something ahead, torches. The Shadow Clan was already in the forest. Kai turned to Ami. "Climb that tree and hide," he said. "Hold the baby tightly." Ami obeyed. She climbed up the tree, holding the baby close to her chest. Kai pulled out his sword and stood in the shadows. The footsteps came closer. 3 warriors appeared, their faces covered with black masks. They carried sharp swords. Kai gripped his weapon. He knew he had to fight. The first warrior attacked. Kai moved fast, blocking the strike and pushing the warrior back. The second one came at him, but Kai dodged and hit him in the stomach. The warrior fell to the ground. The third warrior was strong. He swung his sword at Kai's head. Kai ducked just in time and kicked the warrior's leg. The man stumbled, but he did not fall. Kai knew he could not fight forever. More enemies would come. He had to protect Ami and the baby. Then he saw a chance. He threw sand into the warrior's eyes and ran toward the tree. "Ami, jump on my back," he said. Ami quickly jumped down, still holding the baby. Kai caught her and started running. The warriors shouted behind him, but Kai was fast. Deeper and deeper into the forest they ran until the enemy was far behind. Finally, they stopped near a river. Kai was breathing hard. He looked at Ami and the baby. "You are safe now," he said. Ami looked up at him. "Where will we go?" she asked. Kai did not know the answer. He had lost his home, and now he had 2 lives to protect. "We will find a new home," he said. Together. And so, the warrior's journey changed. No longer a man seeking revenge, he had become a protector. The river flowed gently, its clear water reflecting the moonlight. Kai washed his face and looked at Ami and the baby. They were tired and hungry. "We need food," he said. Ami nodded but said nothing. She held the baby close, rocking him gently. Kai stood up. "Stay here. I will find something to eat." Ami's eyes widened. "Don't leave us!" Kai knelt beside her. "I will not go far. Stay hidden. I promise I will come back." Ami hesitated, then nodded. Kai moved silently through the forest, searching for food. He found some berries and dug up a few wild roots. It was not much, but it would keep them alive. As he turned to go back, he heard something. Footsteps. He quickly hid behind a tree. A group of men in dark robes walked past him. They were not from the Shadow Clan. They carried bags and whispered to each other. "The war is coming," one man said. "Yes," another answered. "The king's army is moving south. More villages will burn." Kai's heart tightened. More people would suffer, just like his village. He wanted to stop them, but he had Ami and the baby to protect. He stayed hidden until the men were gone. Then he ran back to the river. Ami looked up as he returned. "You came back," she whispered. Kai gave her the food. "Eat. We need to be strong." They ate quietly. The baby drank water from Ami's hands. He was weak, but he was alive. As the sun began to rise, Kai stood up. "We cannot stay here," he said. "It is not safe." Ami looked at him. "Where will we go?" Kai looked at the sky. He thought of the war, the Shadow Clan, and the baby in Ami's arms. "There is a city beyond the mountains," he said. "I have heard of a wise old healer there. Maybe he can help the baby." Ami nodded. "Then we must go." Kai smiled. "Yes, we must go." And so their journey continued. The warrior, the girl, and the baby, 3 lost souls searching for a new home. But dangers still lay ahead. Kai, Ami, and the baby walked for hours, following the river toward the mountains. The sun was high in the sky, and the air was warm. Ami held the baby tightly, protecting him from the wind. Kai stayed alert. He knew the Shadow Clan might still be looking for them. Every sound in the forest made him grip his sword. After a while, Ami looked up at him. "Kai, what is the baby's name?" Kai blinked. He had not thought about that. "I don't know," he said. "Do you?" Ami looked at the baby's small face. "My mother used to tell me a story about a great king. His name was Ren." She smiled softly. "Can we call him that?" Kai thought for a moment, then nodded. Ren, a strong name. Suddenly the bushes ahead moved. Kai pulled Ami behind him and drew his sword. A man stepped out. He was old, with a long beard and kind eyes. He carried a wooden staff and wore a brown robe. "You don't need your sword," the old man said. "I mean no harm." Kai did not lower his weapon. "Who are you?" The man smiled. "Just a traveler like you." He looked at the baby in Ami's arms. "That child is sick. He needs help." Ami's eyes widened. "Can you help him?" The old man nodded. "I know a place where he can be healed." Kai did not trust him yet. "Where?" The old man pointed to the mountains. "Beyond those peaks, there is a village. A great healer lives there." Kai hesitated. He had heard of healers before, but many were frauds. Still, Ren needed help. "Can you take us there?" Kai asked. The old man smiled. "Yes. Follow me." Kai, Ami, and Ren followed the stranger toward the mountains. But deep in the forest, hidden among the trees, someone else was watching. A pair of dark eyes followed them. A warrior from the Shadow Clan. Their enemies had found them. Kai felt uneasy. The old man, who called himself Master Jiro, walked ahead with slow but steady steps. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks covered in mist. Ami held baby Ren close, whispering to him. The baby was weak, but his tiny fingers gripped Ami's sleeve. He was still fighting. Kai looked around. Something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just silence. His grip tightened on his sword. Suddenly, a sound, a rustling in the trees. Kai spun around just as a black-cloaked warrior leaped out from the shadows. A blade flashed in the sunlight. Kai blocked the attack just in time. The force of the blow pushed him back. "Run!" he shouted to Ami and Master Jiro. Ami held Ren tightly and ran toward the trees. Jiro followed, his staff in hand. Kai faced his attacker. The warrior wore the mark of the Shadow Clan. His mask covered his face, but his eyes burned with hatred. "You cannot escape," the warrior hissed. Kai didn't answer. He raised his sword. The enemy attacked fast, swinging his blade toward Kai's chest. Kai dodged, countering with a quick strike to the warrior's arm. The man grunted but did not fall. Then another shadow moved in the trees. More warriors were coming. Kai's heart pounded. He could fight one, but not many. He had to get to Ami and Ren. With a powerful swing, Kai knocked the warrior back and ran. Branches scratched his arms as he pushed through the trees. Ahead he saw Ami struggling to climb a rocky path, her arms wrapped tightly around Ren. Master Jiro turned, raising his staff. A Shadow Clan warrior lunged at him, but Jiro moved swiftly, striking the attacker's leg. The warrior fell with a cry. Kai reached them. "Keep going," he shouted. They climbed higher and higher, the enemy close behind. Then they reached a narrow bridge made of wood and rope, stretching over a deep canyon. Jiro turned to Kai. "Cut the bridge once we cross." Kai hesitated. If he cut it, they would be trapped on the mountain. But if he didn't, the Shadow Clan would catch them. Ami was already halfway across. Jiro followed. Kai took one last look at the warriors racing toward them. Then he ran across the bridge. As soon as his feet touched the other side, he swung his sword. The rope snapped. The bridge collapsed. The Shadow Clan warriors stopped at the edge, staring in rage as the bridge fell into the canyon below. Kai breathed hard, gripping his sword. They were safe, for now. But he knew the Shadow Clan would not stop, and the hardest part of their journey was still ahead. Kai watched as the last pieces of the broken bridge disappeared into the canyon below. The Shadow Clan warriors stood on the other side, staring at him with cold, angry eyes. "They won't stop," Kai muttered. "No," Master Jiro said, his voice calm. "But we have time." Ami hugged baby Ren tightly. "Is he safe now?" she asked. Kai looked at the baby. His breathing was slow, and his skin was pale. They had escaped the enemy, but Ren was still weak. "We must keep moving," Jiro said. "The healer is not far." The path ahead was steep, winding up the mountain. The air grew colder, and the wind howled between the rocks. Kai walked ahead, watching for danger. Ami followed close behind, her arms wrapped around Ren. After an hour of climbing, they reached a hidden village in the mountains. Small wooden houses stood between the trees, and smoke rose from chimneys. The people looked up as Kai and the others entered. Some whispered. Others stepped back, eyeing Kai's sword. "Come," Jiro said, leading them to a small house at the edge of the village. Inside, an old woman sat by a fire. She wore a long robe and her eyes were full of wisdom. "This is Elder Hana," Jiro said. "She is the healer." Ami quickly stepped forward. "Please, help him," she begged, showing the baby. Hana took Ren in her arms and placed her hand on his forehead. She closed her eyes for a long moment. "This child is very weak," she said softly. "He needs medicine, rest, and warmth." Ami's eyes filled with tears. "Can you save him?" Hana nodded. "I will try." She placed Ren on a soft blanket near the fire and mixed herbs in a bowl. Then she fed the baby a few drops of the medicine. Kai watched in silence. He had fought many battles, but this, saving a small, helpless life, felt like the most important fight of all. Jiro turned to Kai. "You did well to bring them here." Kai frowned. "It's not over. The Shadow Clan will come." Jiro nodded. "Yes, and we must be ready." Kai looked at Ami, who sat beside Ren, holding his tiny hand. For the first time in a long while, Kai was not just a warrior. He was a protector, and he would fight for this new family no matter what. The fire crackled softly inside Elder Hana's hut. Kai stood near the door, watching as the old healer cared for baby Ren. Ami sat close, her hands clasped together, whispering prayers. Ren's breathing was slow but steady. Elder Hana had wrapped him in warm blankets and given him more medicine. "He is weak," she said, "but he is fighting." Kai let out a quiet breath. They had escaped the Shadow Clan and found safety, at least for now. Outside, the wind howled through the mountain village. Master Jiro stood at the doorway, staring at the path they had traveled. "They will come," Kai said, stepping beside him. Jiro nodded. "Yes, the Shadow Clan will not forget." Kai's hand tightened on his sword. He had spent years preparing for battle, but this time he wasn't just fighting for himself. "We must defend the village," Kai said. Jiro smiled slightly. "Good, then let's begin. Training for war." The next morning, Kai and Jiro gathered the villagers. "The Shadow Clan will come," Kai told them. "We must be ready." Some of the men hesitated. "We are not warriors," one said. "You don't have to be," Jiro answered. "But you must learn to protect yourselves." Kai and Jiro began training them. Some learned to use spears and bows. Others set traps along the mountain path. The village blacksmith sharpened old blades. Kai moved like a true warrior, teaching the villagers how to fight. His sword cut through the air, fast and strong. Ami watched, holding Ren close. She saw the way Kai moved, the focus in his eyes, the strength in his hands. He wasn't just a warrior. He was their leader now. The shadow returns. Days passed, and Ren slowly grew stronger. He still needed rest, but his tiny fingers now gripped Ami's hand with more strength. But then a warning came. A scout ran into the village, breathless. "They are coming!" Kai rushed to the edge of the village. Below, dark figures moved through the trees. The Shadow Clan had found them. Kai drew his sword. This was the moment he had been preparing for. He turned to the villagers. "Stand your ground. Protect your home." Master Jiro stepped beside him. "This is your battle now, warrior." Kai nodded. The past no longer mattered. Now he was fighting for something greater, for Ami, for Ren, for a future worth protecting. As the first enemy warrior stepped into the village, Kai raised his sword. The battle had begun. The first Shadow Clan warrior stepped into the village, his sword gleaming in the morning light. More warriors followed, their dark cloaks moving like shadows in the wind. Kai stood at the front, his sword raised. Behind him, the villagers held their weapons, spears, bows, and whatever they could use to fight. "Hold the line!" Kai commanded. The enemy charged. Kai moved first, his blade clashing against the leading warrior's sword. Sparks flew as they fought, each strike faster than the last. Kai blocked, dodged, and countered with expert precision. A Shadow Clan warrior rushed toward Ami, who stood near Elder Hana's hut, holding baby Ren. Kai saw him. No! He spun, slicing through another enemy before sprinting toward Ami. Just as the warrior raised his sword to strike, an arrow flew through the air, hitting him in the chest. Kai turned to see Master Jiro standing on a rooftop, bow in hand. He gave Kai a nod before firing another arrow. The villagers fought bravely. They were not trained warriors, but they had something stronger, the will to protect their home. Men with spears pushed back the attackers. Women threw stones and used farming tools as weapons. The traps Kai had set along the mountain path slowed the enemy. But the Shadow Clan was powerful. More warriors kept coming. Kai's arms burned with exhaustion, but he did not stop. He fought with everything he had. Then a loud horn sounded. The Shadow Clan warriors froze. Then, without a word, they retreated back into the forest. The battle was over. Kai breathed heavily, his sword dripping with sweat and blood. He looked around. Some villagers were wounded, but they had won. Ami rushed to him, Ren still in her arms. "Kai, are you hurt?" Kai shook his head. "I'm fine." He looked at Ren. The baby's eyes were open. He was awake. Master Jiro approached. The Shadow Clan retreated, but they will return. Kai nodded. Then we will be ready. He had once lived for revenge, but now he lived to protect. For Ami, for Ren, for the village that had become his home, and when the Shadow Clan returned, he would be waiting.